Hey, welcome to the third part of this tutorial series of creating the thing from the Fantastic Four. In this video, I'm going to show you how we can start polishing the surface and refine the volumes a little bit more so that we can start the sculpting process. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here we are in ZRemesher, and of course, we're still a few steps away from having something that looks more like this. But don't worry, everything is going to start coming together really nicely in the next set of videos. So in this one in particular, we're going to concentrate on refining the sculpt. So we have the blockout, we have the adjustment. So we're starting to see something that looks a bit more realistic. And again, you can follow the same approach, the same idea with anything at all. So in this case, I'm not going to sculpt the hands or block out the hands or the rest of the body, because my intention was to create something like this, like a kind of like a mid-shot close-up to his angry face that you can see a little bit of the body, but you won't see behind it. So I'm not going to worry too much about the rest. And again, this is purely a concept, so I don't worry about the topology necessarily or anything like that. That's why I don't care if I leave some things behind, because I'm literally modeling or sculpting this for the shot. All right, and as a quick recap, we actually have 5 different objects. So we have the arms, we have the head, that includes the neck as well, except the jaw. The jaw is a separate object. We have the body, and then we have the eyes, right? So the next step, and this is, like I said, the third step in the process that I follow for this type of things, is to start unifying things a little bit more and kind of like get rid of the very evident sort of cuts or divisions or separation from the geometry. So I'm going to start with the arms and show you the process with the arms because it's pretty easy. So at this stage, even though this is a single subtool, as you can see here in my subtool list, this is ultimately 3 different objects put together, or 6 objects. Actually, 8 objects. I forgot to count the one for the elbow. So we have 4 on each arm, so that makes up for 8 objects. But again, they are individual objects. And when I say individual objects, I mean that they don't have continuity. So if I hold the Control and Shift and click on them, I can isolate them. But in order to sculpt, I want to have this as a single mesh. So you have a couple of options. The simplest approach, and the one that you probably have seen online and you know in some training that I've done as well, I've used it. So the simple approach would be to Dynamesh, right? So I can just take my object and go to Dynamesh, which for you guys would be under the Dynamesh tab here in the geometry. Here we go. And you can just click and Dynamesh, right? Now the Dynamesh resolution will be depending on the overall size of your object. So depending on how big you're creating your blockouts, these might be different, right? So the 128 might not be the same as the one that you have if you're following along. So it might be a little bit more like this, or it would be something completely different, maybe like 8, right? So I think the good compromise is to just click on Dynamesh, see what this gives you. And I think this is a good resolution to start with. I'm going to also turn off the polyframe now so that we can see the unified version, right? So this is something that we can do. Now, I'm going to show you a slightly different approach that kind of like preserves that blockiness that we have from the blockout. So I'm going to undo that. And instead of using Dynamesh, this is still the individual objects. I'm going to bring in the gizmo, and let's go ahead and find it. Here we go. In the gizmo, I'm going to click on the gear icon. And in the gear icon, I'm going to click on this remesh by union. So if I hit remesh by union, what ZRemesher is going to do is look at the volume, so whatever is visible, and anything that is hitting any portion of the mesh that is, intersecting with other objects is going to ignore it. So I'm going to show you clearly what this is. I'm going to click on accept here. And if I go ahead and hide, let's say, a portion of this, and let's go inside, you'll see that there is no intersecting meshes. So all of this has been cleaned up by this process. Now, what this allows me to do is create a ZRemesher that takes into account everything that we have here. So obviously, the problem with this process is that you have these triangles, but that is the reason why the next step is the ZRemesher. So the ZRemesher, again, I have it here in my UI. I use this all the time, but you should have it here as well. Just to give you an idea in terms of like the customizing of the UI, again, I'm going to put a link in the description of this video for the way that I customize my UI. But just to give you an idea, I have kind of like the different processes in sequence in a way. So I would do something with, let's say, the simular, the dynamic subdivision, or I do something with Dynamesh, and then I go into something else like clay polish. Once I have that, then I move into ZRemesher. I can do projection, all of that. So it's kind of like sequential, and it kind of like makes sense to me, right? So once we have something like the ZRemesher, then I go into subdivision. So obviously the UI will be something very unique and very personal. I just kind of like give you an insight into the reasoning behind why I have this the way that I have it. So ZRemesher is something that I use all the time. So what I'll do is I'm going to click on this target polygon count, and I'm going to type 5, which is the default value. And again, this value is in the thousands. So right now I have 5,000. So I'm going to click on ZRemesher. And I also had symmetry enabled. So it basically topologized this entire thing with symmetry. Now, this I think is still pretty high. So I'm going to undo that. So Control Z. And I'm going to go for maybe 1. So 1,000 polygons. Let's go ahead and remesh this. And there we go. Now we have something that looks a little bit better. And you see that some of the polygons and the size, the aspect ratio, if you will, of some of the polygons around here. Let's actually change the material so you can see better. Some of them are slightly different than what you have here. So what I like to do is do a quick smoothing process. So I'm going to increase my brush size. I'm going to hold the Shift key again and the space bar so that I make sure that I change the intensity of the smooth brush. And by the way, the way that you know that you're changing the intensity of the smooth brush and not any other brush is because in the thumbnail here at the top right on my interface, you can see that it says smooth and also the cursor is blue. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to hold the Shift key and smooth this slightly like so. There we go. And this is just to add a little bit of softness around. And now that this is a little bit softer, I'm going to go ahead and click on ZRemesher again. So now we have something that looks a lot cleaner and a lot simpler. That is the next step, or that is the aim of the next step. You can, of course, guide the topology a little bit better. But again, the purpose of this tutorial is to show you that you can create something that looks quite complex from a very simple approach. And this is something that you can apply to absolutely anything you want. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and load up this completed stage because I already finished with that. And there we go. So here it is. So you see I have this mesh. I have the body, and they're all like a single mesh. If I smooth this even further, you'll see it is a single mesh, right? So I did the same process. I just combined them and did the ZRemesher, and I did the same thing for the face. The main difference with the face, and I'll show you that in a second, but the main difference is that I have all these polygroups, and I can guide where the loops are going to be based on the difference of polygons. So just to be clear about what I did here, again, it doesn't really matter. I could have just done it without it, but that sort of like helps me to guide some of the polygroups. So let me go back to the previous one. There we go. So I have the face here, and the face has a bunch of polygroups. So if I go ahead and do the ZRemesher, but I keep the polygroups, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to the ZRemesher right here. All I need to do is make sure that I have keep groups enabled, and I can also smooth out the groups. So basically, the only two things that you need to do are keep the smooth groups to 1 if you want to smooth the difference between the groups, and keep groups just tell ZBrush that you want to use these colors and the IDs of the groups to maintain the topology, or trying to maintain the topology. So ultimately, when we run the ZRemesher, all is going to happen is ZBrush is going to remesh everything, and it's going to try to maintain a line that goes between the different colors. So it's going to make a lot more sense once I do it. But remember, because these are still individual objects, right? What I need to do is run that remesh by union that we did before with the arms. So let's do that. We need to bring in the gizmo. Here we go. Click on the gear icon, remesh by union, click on the gear icon again, and hit accept. Right, so if you get something like this, that is because it's trying to do a symmetry, but these deformers don't work with symmetry. So I'm going to turn off symmetry, do it again. So let's put it in the center here. Gizmo, remesh by union, there we go. Click on gear icon, accept. All right, so now again, if I hide portion of it, you'll see that in the inside, there is no intersection of geometry. So we now have a single mesh. It's just not very useful mesh, but that's what the next step is for. So ZRemesher, let's go ahead and do that. And you'll see that because I have these keep groups enabled, ZBrush try to keep that nice subdivision of the polygons. If it doesn't look great, if you think that this could be improved, one of the reasons is that I have the smooth groups to 1. So this is applying a bit of a smoothing or polishing based on the groups. So if I undo that, I can go ahead and turn this off or set it to 0 and do it again. And this is going to maintain the volumes a lot better than what I had before. So the reason I would use something like smooth groups or not is if I have something like a Dynamesh that is actually quite different in terms of the number of polygons that are in the intersection. But in this case, smooth groups works just fine, and you get this nice polygroup. If you get some weird artifacts, like in this case, what you can do is isolate these bits, right? And then hold Control and W to assign a single mesh. And actually, let's go ahead and undo that so that it's a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to select these two, Control W, and assign a single polygroup. I can do the same thing around here. So I can assign a single polygroup to this, maybe to this little floating one as well. There we go. So I can assign a single polygroup to this kind of like floating meshes. There we go. All right, I'm going to hide this one, Control W, so that I know that these little triangles that were like floating about, they are now part of the same object. So now we can try things again. And actually, let's undo that. I'm going to make sure that I have symmetry enabled. All right, so a lot cleaner. So you can spend a little bit of time just making sure that whatever you're trying to achieve with this ZRemesher works. But that is, in essence, the whole process. All right, so now that I've said that, let's go back in here, because that's what I did in here. And we have literally just a couple of meshes that we need to sculpt. So again, I'm going to push this down. This is the jaw. So I have the jaw, the arms. Sorry, this is not the jaw. This is an older jaw. I don't need that one. Sorry. I have everything in folders as well as I go through the process. But so we have the arms, we have the jaw, we have the head, the body, and the eyes. So the next step would actually be to sculpt some things. So I'm going to press the letter B on my keyboard to bring in the brush palette, then C to filter by clay, and then L. So this is the simple clay brush that comes with ZBrush, and I have the body selected. So my aim now would be to define the anatomy a little bit more. So maybe I can start adding a tiny bit of volume here around the rib cage, just to define it, and maybe a little bit of shape here just to indicate the abdominal muscles as well. I'm going to try to also flatten this area a little bit. So I'm going to press the Alt key just to push this in, right? And remember, I'm trying to go for something rather stylized. So it's going to be pretty easy to identify certain landmarks or certain lines in the anatomy, right? But all I'm doing, and this is kind of like the point that I'm trying to make, is that because I already have the blockout, this becomes a little bit easier. Let's go into solo mode here, and let's try to indicate a bit of the large serratus area here. Again, this is not perfect. I'm just kind of like blocking out the secondary shapes. This need a little bit of work, but it's kind of like to give you the steps rather than watching me do the entire sculpting of the anatomy. All right. Now in this area right here, I'm also going to smooth this out. And this could be for the obliques. So let's smooth this out and push this in. All right. So you see, even though this is very, very basic, and I'm kind of like doing this from memory, I would definitely look into some realistic anatomy reference, or even some of the comic reference of this character to try to replicate that. So now in here, what I'll do as well is I'm going to bring in my damp standard brush. So starting with the letter B, then D, and then S, we have the damp standard. So B, D, S. So that's the kind of like your knife brush. So I'm going to just try to cut here so that it is more defined, that sort of gap in there. And I'll also want to increase the gap in here. So you see, kind of like cutting through and trying to define things a little bit better. So I'm going to try to create that sort of line here, the abdominal region, and maybe sharpen up the difference between, let's say, the rib cage and the rest of the muscles here. All right, so this is essentially the process, is just to go through and using references and all of that to create the anatomy and to sculpt your character. Now, in terms of the tools and the workflows, what I would suggest is that you stick to a very low resolution. As you can see, I haven't subdivided this mesh at all. I'm sticking with this, and that you keep the amount of brushes that you use very, very limited. So for example, if I want to sharpen up this detail, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to reduce my brush size, and instead of changing to a different brush, I'm going to press the Alt key, which is going to produce the opposite effect of the damp standard brush. So the normal effect is this sort of like carving into the mesh. If I press the Alt key, it's going to push the same line out. So I'm going to press very softly around here. There we go. And then maybe around here a little bit more, right? So I'm just defining this slightly better so that when I subdivide this mesh, because I will get to that. So when I subdivide this mesh, I have enough resolution to start polishing the mesh, right? So let's go ahead and do just that. I'm going to subdivide the mesh once. And this is what I like to do. I like to subdivide it once and go over the areas that I want to polish, maybe with the smooth brush, right? And then go back to my clay brush, which, by the way, I have here in my custom UI. And this one might need to be a little bit lower. So I keep refining the location or the placement of the muscles and things like that. And one thing that you can do as well is you can use the clay builder brush. That allows you to have a bit more control over the volumes. I use this all the time. And every time that I do a few strokes to define a new secondary shape, what I do is I just go over with the smooth brush. All right, let's try to flatten this and try to exaggerate that corner or this edge of the pectoral. I'm gonna add some volume here as this group of muscles kind of like connect here in the sternum. All right. So I'm not going to bore you with this entire process because this is something that it is very repetitive. And to be honest, I like to just put some music in the background, get my reference for anatomy app, and then just, refine the anatomy with a lot of repetitive action, like I said, with a lot of strokes like that. So what I'll do is I'm going to bring in the one that I have ready, which again is basically more of the same, just polishing. Let's say, so that I don't leave anything behind, is that if I'm happy with this secondary shape blockout, I'll just subdivide it one more time and continue the refinement, right? So very, kind of like bit by bit, so that you can maintain that smoothness and that polishing of the surface. So I'm going to bring in this one. So you see, this is the one that I kind of like completed. I have this blockout, right? And you see, I just sharpen things a little bit more, and I try to make it very, very blocky, very distinctive for the type of stylization that I want to go for. So if I go into the next level, right, second subdivision level, this is still very low res, as you can see. But the cool thing is that even with this low resolution, I only have 44,000 points at this point. You kind of like see the anatomy. So I did the same thing for all of them. So let's go ahead and make sure I have all high. So I did the same thing for the arms. Again, the same object. If I go to the lowest one, you see this is what I had from the ZRemesher. I just subdivided, and using the clay brush as well as the dam standard, I defined the anatomy a little bit. I did the same thing for the face, right? The difference is that with the face, I went a little bit more, with a little bit higher resolution, really. So this is level 1, this is level 2, and this is level 3, right? And I did the same thing with the jaw. And really the only thing that I did with the jaw is to accentuate these, the lip at the bottom. And of course, before you ask, I also added a bit of poly paint just so that I can work a little bit more, feeling that this guy is getting somewhere, and I have the eyes. But the eyes, let me select that because that's pretty cool. I'm going to select the eyes. I'm going to go into solo mode. This is just poly paint. It's not even like the highest resolution I can go for, but this is just poly paint, and it works totally fine. And if you look at the eyes of my final concept here in Marmoset, that's exactly what I have in ZBrush. So if I get closer, I'll reveal a little bit of the secret, but this is poly paint. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, it's poly paint, but it has a material that is reflective. So this is allowing me to create that effect of a very simple stylized eye for the character without the compromise of having to do something very, very complex just to get just to get something going. So I think as a concept, this works totally fine. And again, this is just pure poly paint. So that's what I did in here. But now that you understand a little bit of the step in terms of what's required, I'm going to show you something that looks a little bit more polished in terms of the surface. So I'm going to load up the next sort of sculpting pass. Here we go. So you see that it shifted a little bit. So between this and this, so this is the one that I just showed you. This is the one that is new, but I'm going to go all high because I have an extra level of subdivision. So again, before, after, before, after. So it's very similar. I just spent some more time refining things, and I created these sort of very pronounced lines that are not really part of the anatomy. I just wanted to exaggerate certain lines, and you see kind of like flows, the deltoid flows into the pectoral here. So that's kind of like what I wanted to do. I also refined the lip here a little bit more, and the, this very thick eyebrow as well. So this is just pure refinement, more of the same. There's no trick here. There's no, I'm not letting anything behind really. Is more about spending the time on using the sculpting brushes and polishing and cleaning the surface. And the way that you do that, of course, is by first being patient about it, but second is to do what I just showed you before. Like the steps are starting with something that is very low res, trying to get that working before you move into the next subdivision level, so that when you move into the next subdivision, you're going to have something that looks pretty clean, and all you have to do is to go ahead and smooth certain areas and maybe accentuate some of the lines. But the bulk of the work is done from the lowest subdivision level. So you see what I defined here for the bottom lip, it remains kind of like the same throughout all the subdivision levels. All I've done between, let's say, this third one and the fourth one is to clean that that difference between these volumes right here, right? And that is done again with the smooth brush. So just to be clear, so that I don't leave anything out. If I want to accentuate this even more, maybe this part right here, I'll take the clay builder brush, I'll add more volume here, and then I will use my smooth brush to clean this up, make sure that this is still a nice and clean surface. And of course, with the smooth brush, I'm kind of cleaning up the sharpness of this line, but that's when I bring in my dam standard brush, and I use the Alt key to push that out. Let's do a smoothing of that. And maybe we can accentuate this even more just for the sake of demo, like so, maybe like that, and smooth this out, and like so. So this is really cool. Again, this is not super high res mesh. We're at the 4th level of subdivision, So it's just that in an effort to show you the process, if I go ahead and subdivide this again, you'll see that these lines and this sharpness that I created, it remains the same. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sharpen it again and smooth this out to maintain that sort of like clean shape all the way through. So in essence, the key for this process in terms of the sculpting is to be very patient and make sure that you can read the volumes at this level and only move to the next subdivision level or subdivide the mesh when you're comfortable and you're happy with what you see. Now, if you are at this level and you try to define this line that looks a little bit crooked like this, that's totally fine. You can totally do this, and you can know for sure that this is going to look a little bit weird in the next subdivision level, but that's when you move into the smoothness and refine like that. So hopefully this makes sense. I know it's a little bit abstract in terms of the, of what to do when sculpting, but it is ultimately about patience and go over the surface and make sure that you look at them from every angle, because that is ultimately the case of a 3D object. All right, so that's it for this step. If you get to this stage where you have like a refined polished surface with subdivision levels, that is all good. So you can click on all low and see the low subdivision, and all high to see the polish of the surface. You might want to go ahead and polish things a little bit more. If you see the area here in the deltoid is a little bit, you can see the faceted polygons. So you could potentially just click on subdivide one more time, and there you go. You have something a little bit cleaner. So that is totally up to you. All right, so I'm going to leave this video here, and in the next one, we're going to concentrate on adding those rocky details for the thing, and I'm going to show you a couple of very cool techniques or approaches to achieve something that is rather complex, but in a quick and easy way that is just about refinement. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.